whether you're in a small local community or whether you're in the center of Manhattan, the arts are in fact one of the biggest economic generators.
It seems that at least 50% of jobs in the performing arts segment have been lost.
No singer can be in a room with any other human being. And also no singer can be on campus. And also we can't ask any student to come to campus.
This crisis is really forcing us to stop and think. For Greensboro Opera, it's been an amazing way to suddenly realize that it has not been very open to diversity.
Welcome. This evening, Class Act is honored to present When the Stage Goes Dark, Performing Arts in COVID Time. I'm Marian Dry, co-chair with Jonathan Sprague of Class Act HR 73, and it is my pleasure this evening not only to introduce the forum, but also, because I am a musician, to moderate the discussion. This evening, we're going to examine the impact of the pandemic and the concurrent and ongoing social justice crisis on the performing arts through the experience and expertise of four extraordinary artists. I'd like to introduce them to you. Jerome Harris is a jazz musician and recording artist who specializes in electronic and acoustic bass guitar, electric guitar, and voice. Peter Cazares is a stage director and teacher who is currently the director of Opera UCLA, professor of music, and the inaugural Susan G. and Mitchell D. Koval, MD chair at the UCLA Herbert Alpert School of Music. He started his musical career as an operatic tenor, and for years performed throughout the world. Emily Mann is an award-winning playwright, director, and artistic director who for 30 years served as artistic director and resident playwright at the McCarter Theater Center in Princeton, New Jersey. And finally, Charlene Jones Marchant is a retired operatic soprano who's currently a voice faculty member at the Music Academy of North Carolina and a member of the Board of Trustees of Greensboro Opera. Listen to this sentence. It appears on a page from the website of the International College of Musical Theatre in London. The page is titled 3 Reasons the Performing Arts Are Important for Society. The sentence reads, without a creative voice, a society may become all but dead inside, and a social group without any creativity is likely to be repressive and tyrannical rather than a force for good. The repressive and tyrannical events of the past week have shown us just how dead inside we as a society have become. The arts are critical to bringing us back to life. But in the United States, support for the performing arts has been and continues to be woefully insufficient. Then we came to March and all performing arts venues abruptly closed. The arts organizations and those who worked for them became voiceless. Freelancers in music and theater had no gigs, and all looked to a future whose prospect promised penury and creative silence. The institutions jumped into actions looking inward and abroad for artistic and financial solutions, and they came up with myriad creative ways to connect with their audiences. So too did the artists themselves. Nonetheless, actors, dancers, singers, musicians, agents, makeup artists, hairstylists, stage hands, costumers, janitors, electricians, sound engineers, ushers, cleaning staff, etc., 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 were out of work. Those who work in the performing arts, whether artists or behind the scenes, are people whose incomes are often low, rarely secure, and easily wiped out completely, as we have just seen. The very nature of live performance and its crowded venues thrust this critical component of our culture, and indeed our national soul, the people who make their livelihoods in it, and the parts of our economy that depend on their presence into dire straits. Until enough people have been vaccinated, venues will remain closed, and when they open again, the world of the performing arts will have changed. In the midst of this, we suffered the horrific deaths of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd. Our collective soul floods with outrage at these murders and the vast inequities and racial and social injustice of which they are a brutal and persistent component. These tragedies sparked a search of the souls of many of our performing arts organizations. They are looking within, both to change their hiring to promote diversity in their institutions and to create programs reflective of the diversity of our American society and a more just retelling of our history and life in America through the performing arts. It is a tall, tall order to look at all of this in 90 minutes, but we're going to do our best. We're going to begin the evening with the opportunity to hear from each of our panelists about the work they're doing and the particular challenges they see right now. Then we will discuss broad artistic realities, challenges, and changes through their particular views. And then we'll move the conversation to the topic of effective activism, what we need to address to save our arts organizations and our artists, as well as the structural changes that should be central to the future of the performing arts. From there, we will answer audience questions, and finally, we'll ask each of our panelists to share calls to action. To begin our conversation, I'd like to invite each of our panelists to talk about what has been the biggest impact of the pandemic and the social justice upheaval on your work and how you have responded to it. Emily, would you start us off?
Yes, I'll try. It's such a huge question, and I'm more interested in hearing from my colleagues than in what I have to say, but I will try to be brief and steer me, Marion, if I go off course.
That'll do.
Thank you. On a personal level, I was going through a huge life change when the pandemic hit. I was to step down after 30 years as artistic director and resident playwright at McCarter Theater in Princeton, New Jersey, which was under my leadership, a theater that was particularly mission-driven to put on stage who we are as America. And who we are as a world. So we were, as a core value to our institution under my leadership, dedicated to producing and developing the work of stories by and about women and people of color. So we were there for 30 years. When I decided to step down was the year before, and I was going to do it on July 1st, and yet end of February, beginning of March, my gala season, my final season had to be stopped. And I was dealing with what most arts institutional leaders were dealing with, which was shuttering, closing down, and how to do that responsibly, responsible to our staff, to our artists, and to our community. And it was very painful and very difficult. I made sure that we got healthcare. I started to raise money so that our staff would have healthcare throughout the pandemic, that I would be able to pay all of the artists we had said that we would produce, including the designers, the playwrights, the actors. I wanted to make sure that we were not saving an institution, an arts institution at the expense of artists. That was a huge mission, and we were able to accomplish that. And then I had to put everything we could online to try to keep in touch with our audiences. So that was a huge challenge, and one I felt we met on a lot of levels. And then, of course, we were hit with the slaughter of Black Americans by police around the country. And particularly when George Floyd was murdered, our industry went into, the theater industry went into real grassroots activism. And I was very excited to be a part of that, first as an institutional leader, and then when July 1st hit, to continue doing that as a freelance artist and an arts advocate. I'm almost feel guilty to say that I had a lot of wonderful time once I stepped down, because I'd been overworked for 30 years, and now I had brain space and time and heart space to be an artist again. So I've been writing up a storm, some of them on social justice issues. Some of them I'm writing a musical with Lucy Simon and Susan Birkenhead, which is a love story, which I've wanted to do all my life, since all I've done all my life is write about social justice. Now I got to write something about love. I've been able to direct. I directed Night of the Iguana with Felicia Rashad and Dylan McDermott on Zoom. And my play, Having Our Say, is getting ready for a Broadway revival, which it seems particularly useful at this time because it's wisdom from two African-American sisters, both over 100 years old, who give us the history of all of this, as well as we bathe in the humor and the delight and the humanity of these women, and their voices have the ring of sanity. And I think we need to hear from them right now. So I'm very pleased that if there is a Broadway, and I think there will be soon, that will be one of the offerings. So I've been very active politically and very active artistically. And strangely, it has given me the opportunity to have a reflowering.
Fantastic, thank you. And Jerome, that seems to me to lead to some of the work that you've been doing.
Well, I guess my story during this virus crisis might be, to a degree, the inverse of Emily's, in that I have not really been doing much work. I've been sort of putting in my maintenance, practicing and such, and but a lot that I've been doing has been planning for future work. And I guess it's been quite a shock being out of work for 10 months and counting, because I'm a freelancer and not tied to any institutions, and I have including non-performing work, like many musicians, many of my peers teach, many of them at colleges and conservatories and such, and I have not been doing that in recent years. So so the biggest impact that the pandemic has had on me is been experiencing the shock of being out of work for the first time since 1974, and being out of work for 10 months and counting, and observing the fact that I'm in this situation with hundreds of thousands and around the world, millions of other people. So from a certain perspective, I just tell myself, well, what else is new, given this period that we're in? I've been counting my blessings, because I very much realize how fortunate I am, and particularly since my wife and I know a few people who have died from this COVID-19 disease, but we're both healthy, and we have our expenses are low, and my wife can do some work online, substantial amount actually, and so we're definitely keeping our heads above water. Many people are not. And many people in the performing arts are not. So, I guess, there's a saying that, we're all in the same storm, but we are not all in the same boat.
Right.
And I'm very aware of that. And so that realization is part of what spurred me to renew my interest and up my activity radically, to try to do some things that might improve prospects for my peers and others in the art world, people who are, who've committed themselves to, careers doing this.
Yeah, and we will look forward to hearing more about that a little later in the conversation. Charlene, we hear about what's been going on for you?
Yes, I'm on the teaching end of the spectrum of the performing arts. And of course, the pandemic hit me immediately. As a voice teacher at the Music Academy of North Carolina, we shut down immediately. We went to virtual lessons. I had some special, I call them gigs, as a special music teacher at some local private schools. And one of them shut down all the music immediately and refused to do any online teaching. But they did pretty much honor their contract to the end of the term. And the other school that where I taught, went to online music. So, and I had no experience with online teaching at all. And I tried various platforms, FaceTime, Skype, Google Meet, and I ended up with Zoom as the best one. All of my voice students at the Music Academy remained, which I had one adult student whose job became precarious, so she had to stop taking lessons, and one other student who just disliked the online lessons completely. But I've been very fortunate that most of my students stayed with me. It's a lot more work as a voice teacher, because in my studio, when I accompanied my students on my piano, that was how we learned music. And because of the time lag in Zoom, that is no longer possible. So one student taught me about the virtual memo that I could do on my iPhone. So I record their accompaniments now on my iPhone and then text it to my students, and then they play it back. And that's how we work on music now. The real drawback to that is if a student does not have access to a phone and an iPad or laptop, then we're in trouble. I mean, so far, that's not been an issue with the students. At the Music Academy, it is opened up again now for the strings, piano, and percussion students. If their teachers want to teach them, they're welcome to go to the studio at the Music Academy. All the voice and wind instruments, brass instruments, are still virtual. So
and Peter, you have something quite similar to that, I think, at UCLA. And can you tell us a little bit about what's been going on for you? Peter, you're muted. You're muted, Peter. This is a rare moment when you can't hear Peter.
I should know better, but I'm so used to muting myself during meetings. So on March 1st, I had just opened a new production of Samson and Delilah at the Washington National Opera in DC. I returned home, and in the next week, thinking to myself, maybe I shouldn't be doing this, but being careful, I flew to Seattle for some meetings about an upcoming Bohème. I flew to Nashville Symphony for some meetings about a Figaro with the symphony there, all the time thinking these are not going to happen. And I don't know why they're not just saying they're not going to happen. I got back on March 8th to LA, and that was pretty much that. So there was cancellation or postponement of these and other professional productions. And we've just heard yesterday or on Friday, that classes won't resume at UCLA until next fall. So they are canceled this quarter, spring quarter, summer quarter, and that's where we are. So I had been on sabbatical for the last 2 quarters last year. I had time to adjust before dealing with students, but I definitely dropped in on Opera Workshop to see what people were doing. The voice teachers were figuring out using various platforms how to teach, but for teaching singing is different from rehearsing an opera. And of course, we are still looking for the silver bullet, which will enable us to have one singer in a room with a piano, not in the same room, but in a virtual room with a pianist without latency. We can do that with a platform called Sonobus. But if all of a sudden we're trying to do 3 singers or 4 singers and a pianist, it basically crashes. So that's unfortunate. I pivoted and I provided a lot of academic content. We did a big course for our students called Dance, Dress, and Decorum, which was kind of fun. It was 500 years of fashion from the Renaissance to the Edwardian, and talking about what people wore and why they wore it and what was going on politically. And that was fun, although it was very interesting navigating the waters of what happened when one of the instructors by accident said, "And then Columbus discovered America." Oops. Yeah, so yeah, but you know, that's the job. So I said that was, you know, shouldn't have said that, apologized, and we moved forward. Because we certainly know at this point that learning how to correct yourself is part of the deal. I should also say that as part of the reaction to the Black Lives Matter horrific situation, I've joined, I'm one of the members of the UCLA Herb Alpert School of Music Anti-Racist Committee, which has been extremely interesting, eye-opening, worthwhile, but extremely tough, because some of the demands are decolonialize the curriculum. Well, that's a tall order, and what exactly does it mean? Does it mean no more Beethoven, which is what some people think, or does it mean more world music, which we have anyway? So we're trying to figure that all out.
So that leads us nicely into the next section, which is going to be a conversation among the 4 of you about I mean, we've talked a little bit about some of the current realities, but moving into creative and potentially radical solutions for finding our way to the next stage of the experience, and eventually when the pandemic ends. And Charlene, Greensboro Opera, you are on the board, and that's in Greensboro, North Carolina, and located in Guilford County, and it's a small regional company. And I know it's committed to presenting really wonderful staged opera productions, but also to arts education and civic engagement in the area. And you're on the board, and I gather you're on the new ad hoc committee, the Task Force on Social Justice. Formed to address social justice issues and equity and diversity. Could you tell us a story or two about what's happened with that company in the last 9 months? And as you all, the rest of you hear things, please chime in and share synergies and different thoughts.
Yes, the pandemic, and to be hit both with the pandemic and the social injustice issues with the murders of, as you said, George Floyd and other Black people, we felt we were in the unique position that were about to present the opera Porgy and Bess in November of last year. We knew that we would be presenting an opera that many people in the local community would find outdated and guilty of perpetuating negative stereotypes. So we had 2 tasks. One was we wanted to write a pledge, which we did, which the task force was asked to present to the board, committing Greensboro Opera to social equity, which was approved and adopted in August last year, and which we committed to a certain percentage to try and represent the community in the board, as members of the board, in productions and in the orchestra. Let's see what else. So we are also educating ourselves to deal with the pushback that we know we may have. Because we feel that Porgy and Bess is too beautiful an opera to be consigned, to not be heard. The pandemic also affected us in our publicity, fundraising, which all became virtual, as you might know, might think. We worked very hard to have our soloists who were doing performances to be paid the same stipends that they were going to receive, even though their productions were virtual that we had. In fact, one young singer who had car trouble, the opera company paid for him to fly to participate in the production. The main thing, another thing I want to say, I don't know if this is the main thing, but we have a unique program, I'll say this very quickly, for the schools here in Guilford County, which is made up of 9 municipalities, which include Greensboro, High Point, Jamestown, various other places. And it's called the Barbara Ann Peters Write Your Own Opera. And it is when 4th graders in the public school system submit through their schools stories that they want to have set to opera. It is the one that is chosen is edited by Greensboro Opera's artistic director. It's set to music by a local composer and then sung by University of Greensboro voice students. And then the following year at the Carolina Theater here in Greensboro, all the 5th grade classes in the public schools come in, about 6,000 students who come in to see 2 performances over 3 days of this little opera. And it's often a first introduction for students, for public school students. And the ethnic makeup of the public schools is Black or African Americans, about 41%, and white students are about 29%. So we feel we're doing a great service to introduce this art form, creating future audiences and possibly future performers for this art form.
So I'm interested in addition to this, thinking about when the pandemic begins to let go of its clutches and we are beginning to be able to be back in together, what's going to happen to our performances, to venues? Peter, did you have something? You look like you're going to say something.
That's me thinking. Well, I mean, I can tell you what's happening now, which is that some of you may have seen in Barcelona, the Liceu, or maybe it was Madrid in the Teatro Real, they opened and they had trees in the seats in the orchestra, which looked very gorgeous, but it was a little bit peculiar because, of course, there were not allowed to be people there. At the same time, the Salzburg Festival opened last August, and they opened with a reduced audience, but with an audience. And they did a new production of Strauss's Elektra in the big Festspielhaus. And the singers theoretically potted, although they didn't, because I knew the woman who was singing Elektra. She said, we just stayed on our own, but you know, everybody has to get to work, and we weren't isolating on our way to work. And then people had spouses and children come, and the spouses and the children weren't isolating, but miraculously no one got sick. So that's terrific, and gives some cause for hope. But of course now Austria is shutting down again. So I think it will go in 2 ways. One will be, and I know that this production of Bohème that I'm supposed to do, both in Seattle and Washington, they've both said, we want this to be the real Bohème. We want this to be big and lavish and everybody on stage. There are 200 people on stage in Act 2. And we want everybody to be in the audience. And I'm like, okay, maybe 2026. I mean, I don't know when that's going to happen. You know, there'll be this old man directing. But I think more rationally, I will say, for instance, in Seattle, they have found a loophole which says that if you are making a movie, which is then going to be streamed, then you get to jump the queue in a sense, and you can actually have people work. So they have opted to film a bunch of their projects, and they're releasing them to subscribers as films, which are not like necessarily movies, but they're filmic events, I would put it that way, of normal operas. The other big untapped thing, and it's starting to explode really, is people coming up with new work, and new work that is small, and new work that is not necessarily designed for Zoom, but that is designed to be, to exploit new technologies so that it can be viewed digitally in a way that is satisfying. And
That's happening in the theater too.
yes, we need to just find some great composers to do that, and they're there.
And Emily, you said you thought that Broadway was going to come back sooner rather than later?
Well, I don't know what we call sooner and later in these weird days where we move through one blur's day after another. But the Dr. Fauci just this morning or yesterday said he thought that there would be a way to get people back into theaters by the fall, mid to late fall, which makes me think more like early winter. And already people are, as Peter was saying, getting their work ready. In the theater, we have less money now. I think a lot of our audiences have less money and can't pay as much as they could. People are looking at how to do things that will cost less and be able to be done in a way that there can be some social distancing in the theaters. So even when we come back, I mean, we've gone through plagues before, the theaters. I mean, we look at, Shakespeare went through 3 plagues, and he came back and had written some of his best work during that time. I think it was
And that's what you're doing,
Scottish
right,
play,
Emily?
yeah, right. If only I could write Lear, the Scottish play, and Antony and Cleopatra in this year and a half, right?
Well, we'll be ready
But
when
I
it's
think
done.
that's what we're going to be seeing. People are stored up with, the artists are, as Jerome was saying, keeping their chops going somehow, any way they can. And a lot of writers are doing a lot of writing. But yes, I think we will come back. I think it'll be very different. And I also think the institutional theaters, as well as Broadway and the commercial theaters, are looking very carefully at the Black Lives Matter movement, how incredibly racist and sexist our particular industry has been, and many of us have been fighting it for a very long time and hoping that finally we're going to make more progress in this area so that when people come back, it's not just going to be the same old on stage. That's my
Charlotte,
hope.
I know you have something to bring to that, but I'd actually like, before you do, and we'll get back to you, to talk to Jerome, who, is in a different kinds of venues, sometimes large venues, but sometimes very small ones. And what are you thinking it's going to look like for you? And I know that you've been doing marvelous concerts on the jamming on the streets of Brooklyn.
Well, I think that there are a lot of questions. There's a lot of head scratching going on. In the short term, well, I'll give you an example. In the short term in New York City, there's work going on both by city government and many, many musicians trying to figure out what can be done to restart in-person performing outdoors when warm weather comes back. Personally, I really feel that New York City blew it in terms of trying to help get some sensible virus protocols and support for performers to take advantage of the last warm weather season. People were doing it in a guerrilla manner, including in my neighborhood, just literally around the corner from me, some colleagues set up a weekly outdoor jam session that was in conjunction with a expansion of New York City's Open Streets, Open Restaurants initiative. There's happened to be a number of bistros on this wide street, half a block from me, and restaurants, got set up. We're able to set up outdoor, expand their outdoor seating areas that through the city's Open Restaurants program, and so performers, including my neighbors, started doing this open jam session weekly. And we're currently trying to work with the local neighborhood development council that ran that initiative to make the thing more legal, you could say. And the city has passed a a program. Actually, they're instituting a program called Open Culture, which has gotten a bit of press, to help venues have access to public space for putting on outdoor arts and culture events. And since outdoor events, it's easier to do the social distancing, and they're demonstrably safer than indoor events. So there's going to be a lot of that. How that affects, more formal work remains to be seen. Both in terms of how it affects the work content itself, and the, trying to get it paid. How setting up things to actually have performers earn income in that way, in those sorts of venues. There's a lot of thinking and proposing, and trying to come up with ways. We're very much in that period, trying to envision things for the spring, summer, and fall.
Well, hopefully by fall, things will begin to move back inside, and you'll have your venues back, and that they won't have collapsed altogether.
We'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And ventilation is going to be very important.
What?
Ventilation is going to be
Ventilation,
hugely
right,
important.
exactly.
And when you think about the old clubs, it's going to be quite a challenge.
Right. Charlene, I know that you have some interesting things that Greensboro is doing in terms of new operas. Is that something that?
Yes, and I think I'm sort of cluing into what Jerome said about just trying to envision how we're going to go forward, and whether it's going to be outdoors or inside. And Emily's thing about it being smaller operas. I think Greensboro Opera has formed a feasibility committee to look into doing an opera on the Greensboro Four, which is the young students, the 4 young college students in 1960 who started the lunch counter sit-ins at the Woolworth building. And we're hoping to do that. We want to try and do things more with the community, and we're hoping we can do that with the International Center, Civil Rights Center and Museum, located in that original Woolworth building here in Greensboro. So we're really trying to work with local groups and organizations to address community, because we all want to see ourselves on stage. And then small, it doesn't have to be big opera, just small things. And hybrid operas, that's
Right. So we're going to turn the discussion now to effective activism targeted at saving our arts institutions and organizations and the artists, and producing structural changes to promote social justice and diversity. The broad questions for this conversation are: what's wrong, what needs to change, and what broader solutions on the local, national, and international, the local, regional, and national levels need to come about. Who needs to be involved in making the changes, and what institutions need to be involved in making the changes, and what can we do? And Jerome, since the beginning of the pandemic, you've been on the steering committee of the Music Workers Alliance, an activist organization committed to improving the working conditions of independent musical artists. And when the pandemic hit, you moved yourself to the center of that work. And could you talk to us a little bit about the realities for gig musicians now, and your thoughts about how those can change and the work that needs to be done to get those changed? And then think about this in other arenas with the other panelists.
Well, I'll start off by just relating a few short vignettes. Back in July, Music Workers Alliance surveyed music workers, performers, DJs that we're in touch with, and is asking them, and asked them what what was their situation, particularly, financially. And I mean, the responses were frankly kind of harrowing. I mean, I'll read a bit, from some of them. I was a full-time touring DJ. I arrived back from tour. 2 days later, released an album. Then 2 days after that, all of my shows got canceled for the weekend and beyond. She, mentions that, even if I can get by for now, I will need to be very careful living off unemployment benefits solely. Another performer, said that, he's applying to barber school when they open. This is after 20 years of training and performing within the music industry. Someone else, wrote in saying, I'm 67 years old, I'm in excellent health, but salaried or hourly work will probably be hard to find given the competition, and any arts sector related work may not be available for many months. The people who are talking about, difficulty, making their mortgage payments, a number of people saying that they, had to move back in with their parents. And, these are folks who are in their 30s, 40s, and quite a number of folks saying that they would have to leave New York City, which is, where I'm based. So all of this, these are, it's just examples of some of the precarity that many performers have found themselves, it's been heightened by this virus crisis. Music Workers Alliance did a survey just a few months ago from end of October into December, and we found that 71% of the folks that responded had lost more than 75% of their income during the pandemic. So people are, depleting their savings, looking for work in other fields. 15% of the respondents to our survey had to move to save money. And all of this is in line with surveys that have been done by Americans for the Arts and other, researchers. So, we're all kind of and to zoom out, obviously, these, what I was just, the stories that I just related are all about performers, and meanwhile, there's the rest of the industry that we work in. And, there's a study that Brookings Institution put out back at the end of July. And, they expected that over 2.3 million jobs and $74 billion in people's, in companies and people's monthly earnings were going to be lost, by this thing. So the learning curves that individuals and institutions and, activists are dealing with are steep. And in terms of the social justice component of all of this, actually, I'm going to post something in the chat just as one example. This is an article that Billboard magazine put out a while back. They actually looked at the catalogs of some companies, some record companies that they had acquired, and found a really sharp structural disparity in the royalty rates that the artists on those labels were paid, that the Black artists on those labels were paid, compared to, the non-Black artists. And this is an example of some work that's being done by Music Workers Alliance and a group called the Black Music Action Coalition, if I remember their name correctly, trying to look at the systemic inequities in our part of the entertainment industrial complex. And of course, these inequities are many decades old, but the pandemic has heightened the need for those to be addressed.
Yeah. So Emily, I know that you've been thinking about these issues for our society as a whole and on a very, very top of the heap kind of view. I'd love it if you'd talk a little bit about your thinking about how we should,
Oh.
as a nation, look at this.
Oh, sure. I was just going to say that, and in terms of the rest of um, uh, the arts sector, those anecdotes that Jerome was mentioning are across the board of people being homeless and being on food lines and losing their health insurance. Basically, the arts sector has been decimated. That has to do with the performing arts sector. And I'm working with a number of organizations and very actively with the Dramatists Guild, which is our playwrights union. It's not a union, it's a guild, to reframe our story and to tell the story of the arts in economic terms. So, we've often talked about that we are essential, for the very soul of our country, and the arts are what, you started out, Marion, with so many beautiful and eloquent quotes about that arts is essential to bringing us back to life. And I couldn't agree with it more. But we're also realizing that so many people in our anti-intellectual society and in our anti-art society think of us as sort of a luxury and soft. And so we're looking at it also as starting an education campaign to work with the federal government, not only for massive relief packages, but to engage with Congress in some very important education on this sector. So, for example, most people don't know that we're an $877.8 billion economy in this country. That's the arts sector. We generate $265 billion a year, more than all transportation combined, and yet the top 10 airlines were allotted $50 billion by the CARES Act, while we're fighting over a measly $75 million appropriated by the NEA. We're a $230 billion arts economy in California, $120 billion in New York, $46 billion in Texas, of all places, $30 billion in Illinois, $8 billion in Indiana, $4 billion in Kansas, $1 billion in Wyoming. We're everywhere, we're in every state. And I think we have to make the case that we drive community health. Not just the artists, we drive communities, economies, the health of the economy, not just the artists, but as Jerome was saying, the administrators, the custodians, the restaurant workers, the craftspeople, the stagehands, the hotel works. We're big business because we are local and we are everywhere. And in addition, we're one of our country's greatest exports, and why America's been so influential across the world. So we're trying to get this message out. And the cornerstone for what I'm really working on is that we're advocating for a modern day WPA, Works Progress, like FDR created in the 30s, but not as racist as it was. I have been doing a lot of research into it, and we get all excited and we think, oh, Zora Neale Hurston and the all Black Macbeth and all, but in fact, we would do it differently now. We would have to, thank God. We want a secretary of the Department of the Arts, an arts new deal, if you will, to put arts workers back to work and arts at the center of our recovery. This will help recover the local economies as well. If people want to join this initiative or find out more about it, you can go to americansforthearts.org and to beanartshero.com. I also just want to say the Actors Fund gives to artists in need, not just actors. If you give to your local arts institutions, that will help get people back to work. Lobby your representatives in Congress for arts advocacy, and our own Chuck Schumer, who was the class of what, 72? 70, was he in your class?
No.
No, all right. Well, we had dinner
He
with him.
was 73, wasn't he?
Was he?
Is he? I don't think
Well,
so.
No.
No.
well, we had dinner with him frequently at Adam's house, Peter. So I'm trying to figure out what, anyway, he is backing an arts plan. And we should cheer him on for that. I also would like to say that some people can sponsor a creative team if you're in a philanthropic frame of mind. And there are two other things I would like to just mention. The Industry Standard Group, TISG, is working to back Black producers in the commercial theater sector. And they're doing extraordinary work. You can look at them on their website, the industrystandardgroup.com, TISG. And also Native Voices, which is the artistic director is Delana Studi, and she is the only Native American professional theater in the country, and she's in LA, and she's fantastic. I just worked with her. She was playing Wilma Mankiller in my play Gloria, the life of Gloria Steinem, and Wilma Mankiller was the first Cherokee chief, female Cherokee chief of the Cherokee Nation, and one of Gloria's best friends, and Delana is her cousin, and she ended up being in the play, and she's running this fantastic theater right now. But there are also many, many theaters that are dedicated solely to people of color. Crossroads Theater Company in New Brunswick is a fantastic Black theater company. And the lists go on and on. If anyone is interested, I can make those lists. But I just wanted to say that we haven't told our story well. We're storytellers, and we have to start by saying that we are workers, and it's hard work to do what we do. And we need to be compensated. What the pandemic has exposed and what the Black Lives Matter movement has exposed is that it was never okay. We don't want to get back to anything. It never worked economically to begin with. And the system was a racist and misogynist system for a very long time. I'm very excited that now that it's laid bare, that we can start making real and fundamental change.
So, and I would like to move, as a longtime music educator, I would like to ask Peter to talk about young artists and what we think we need, how we can be supportive so that we actually don't lose a big segment of a period of time, because artists will think that they just simply couldn't possibly do what it is that's in their hearts and in their beings and is their call.
I will share the one bit of good news that we had from last spring is that all of the voice teachers, and I saw this too, even though I don't teach voice, but I saw this in watching the end of quarter activities. Everybody got better. Now, how was that possible? And that was really an unexpectedly optimistic outcome. And we all ended up thinking that it was because people stopped waiting for us to, dollop the spoon into their mouths so that they could, ingest knowledge. And they realized they were either going to do it on their own or it wasn't going to happen. So that, in a sense, was a great outcome. I do have people at the same time, some of them younger, obviously, but I have people saying things to me like, well, why can't we just do scenes and arias and ensembles? Why can't we do acts of operas now, even though you can't do a whole production? And I'm like, because we can't do anything which involves more than one person. So that's a problem. We can do arias, but we can't do scenes and we can't do full shows. And I just want to say, if anybody who's listening knows of fantastic ways to do synchronous performance and coaching and rehearsal with low latency, please shoot me an email. I also want to just take one moment to talk about something that I've, because the thing is, if you look at opera from the point of view of an industry and just talking about race, because there's a whole, now opera is racist is an Instagram account, and some of the stories are just hair raising. The problem is that it's very easy to look at the names of our past, like Leontine Price, Martina Arroyo, Grace Bumbry, say that opera has plenty of African-American singers. That's not a problem. And nowadays we look at Angel Blue, who happened to have been my student at UCLA, Go Bruins, Eric Owens, Pretty Yendi, Larry Brownlee, Janae Brugger, Russell Thomas, Janae Bridges. They're all fantastic singers from now. But where are the conductors?
Mhm.
Where, and by the way, where there are more female conductors, but finally, Roderick Cox, God bless him, is going to be conducting at the Met. Michael Morgan is a wonderful conductor, but he doesn't conduct enough. Where are the Black stage directors? Tazewell Thompson is a wonderful stage director who just took over as head of opera at Manhattan School of Music. And he is, shall we say, slightly older than we. So where are the young ones? And that, to my, in a sense, that's my answer to what the question is. It's a pipeline issue, that it is up to us to really seek out. I mean, I know that there are amazing voices at historical Black universities and colleges. I got that backwards. HB, what is it?
HBCU, that was correct.
You, right, okay, yes. But it's possible to find some of them as singers, and we do get a lot of applicants, but to get people into the artistic administration of a company, that's a problem. So one of the things that actually my agency has come up with is a program where they're going to be taking interns who are interested in learning how to work in business. And whether or not they end up being in opera or being in the performing arts, they will learn skills. So that is a commitment that they have made, which I think is terrific. And they're going after BIPOC interns to do their bit to train leaders of the future. So that's something that I think many people can do.
I would like to turn now to some of the questions from the audience, which I think you will all be interested in. And Charlene and Emily, this is a question, and it says, if Black lives really matter, how receptive or open will Broadway be to new Black voices? And I would say Broadway and opera. And Charlene, you're talking about that for Greensboro. Black voices and allowing true changes to happen for writers, actors, and artists. I'm a writer and I want to be part of the change we all need to happen. Would you two like to address that a bit?
Do you want to?
You go first, Charlene.
Well, I mean, I think what Peter said about the pipeline is, how do you get into the pipeline? I'm not sure how that happens. We are looking for a writer if someone is interested, and maybe that's a way to get in the pipeline. We're looking for someone to write, give us some ideas about how to write our opera about the Greensboro Four, you know? So I don't know if that's a way to start.
Mhm.
I don't know. You have to start small and then you get, you know.
So I would say also that the smaller regional companies might be a place to begin.
Yeah.
Emily, do you have further thoughts?
Yeah, I would say that it's already starting. It started and it is continuing, and it will only get stronger. Right now, see, I don't think it's a pipeline issue. I think the extraordinary artists are out there, the directors, the potential producers, certainly the writers and the performers. And how do you harness all that incredible creative energy? And what's happened is, if you look at the last few Pulitzer Prizes, they are by Black playwrights. They're for Black playwrights. If you look at the biggest sensation of the Broadway season last year, Jerome Harris's Slave Play, whether you liked it or not, he has become a superstar. It is happening, and now there is no way, for example, that you can put on a production without the question, how diverse is your cast? How diverse is your design team? And the producers, and I've now made it part of my contracts that the producers have to have a producer of color on my shows. And if they, and that they must bring in interns and or assistants or apprentices into into their offices. And you know what? People, it turns out, want to do it. They didn't know how to do it. They didn't know what to do. That now they're doing it. The major not-for-profits in New York have now brought on associate artistic directors of color across the board. And we're seeing that around the country in the regionals. In terms of what's going on for writers, I think, Charlene, you're absolutely right to start a commissioning program. And if what you're writing about, I mean, I'm still saying I'm looking for the Tulsa massacre from the Tulsa Opera and the Tulsa Theater Company. I'm looking for the stories from Greensboro. I'm looking for the theaters around the country to make these commissions extremely exciting and with enough money that people can, in fact, be able to live and work. And I think we're going to see a flowering of that. I mean, it was starting before, but it's really starting to take off. And I know, because I was sort of a lone voice howling in the wilderness for so long. And now I feel, oh, I've got all these allies who want to be doing this. And so I get a lot of people asking me how we did it at McCarter.
That's great. And Rhiannon Giddens is doing something next year.
awesome.
Isn't she's awesome? About the Wilmington riots and the massacres in Wilmington, North Carolina, which most people have not heard about.
Yeah.
And
And there's, and my play Greensboro Requiem was talking about white supremacy,
yeah, which I did not know before, and I've read that now.
20
That's
years ago,
really
yeah.
something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a couple of more general questions, and Jerome, I think this one's for you. Will any of the states step up to support public performances outdoors in the summer, such as the ones you're talking about? Do you know about other places where this is going to happen?
I guess that the short answer is I don't know. It seems that states are very varied in their responses. I think that there's going to be much more going on the local level. I will I'll mention that, being a New Yorker, I've been extremely frustrated at the conflicting information, conflicting messaging coming from New York State and New York City about even whether venues can essentially do anything and monetize it. As an example, Governor Cuomo's office months ago put out a announcement that, okay, the state had entered stage 4 of dealing with the virus, and outdoor arts and culture performances were allowed to happen as long as they complied with the health guidelines. Then the state liquor authority came out with an edict saying that, well, only incidental music is allowed. It cannot be advertised and it cannot be ticketed. So of course, venues, if they're not able to sell tickets and let people know that music is going to be happening, how can the venues or the performers, earn anything? So there was a court case. I think it was put on hold, the state liquor authority's edict, and the state liquor authority is appealing, and no one knows where this is going to go. This is one example of something that really doesn't make any sense. Something that did make sense elsewhere, the city of Tulsa, Oklahoma, their arts and culture and tourism, entity, got put together a program to certify venues that applied to this program, and they steered CARE Act's money to those venues if the venues committed to paying half of the performers' fees. And these were for largely outdoor performances, and some indoor ones, as long as they complied with Tulsa's health protocols.
So it seems to me that what you're saying is that as we move forward with this, we're hoping that many different places will find ways to get music back outside this summer. Yeah.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Well, if you look at Barrington Stage, they actually were able to do it last summer. And if anyone's interested, they worked with some, with epidemiologists and the unions and everything else, and they were successful in how to put work outside.
Peter, you had something to say?
Yeah, just quickly, Santa Fe Opera is planning to perform next summer, this summer. Yeah, so we'll see how that goes.
Yeah.
I know Glimmerglass has not canceled. I think they're planning to do things and probably using outdoor venues as well, which they are trying to make happen.
Okay, that's hopeful.
Mhm.
I have two more questions, and very briefly, this is from someone who's younger and who is asking for guidance, and I think it's a great question. Do you have suggestions for young artists just starting out during these challenging times? I.e., if you do nothing else, you should be sure to. Do you have any thoughts for this artist who's asking questions?
What is their field?
It doesn't say.
Well, for my field, I would say that the basic thing remains the same. Learn how to sing.
Yeah.
Because no matter what, you still have to figure out how to do your art and how to do your craft.
Learn your languages.
Learn your languages, learn all that stuff.
Yeah.
And probably these days, get comfortable with recording technology,
Yes.
because there's a lot that's going on in that realm, until, and it will continue to some degree, back when in-person performing returns.
Right.
And I would dovetail onto Jerome with the theater, that if you're a playwright, actor, or director, there's a lot of phenomenal work going on with people just getting together as friends and colleagues. They're not getting paid, unfortunately, although some have been able to get some grants. Make the work, make the connections, because it's a collaborative art form, and you find your soulmates, and nothing can stop you from creating if you put your mind to it.
Great. And the final question, which I think is an interesting one, is what have we learned from past disasters that forced the stage to go dark and then recover? I don't know that we've ever had a disaster such as this, but
Yeah, I definitely didn't live through the 1918 flu epidemic.
Right. But when you think about 9/11, I was running a theater, and a few people ended up showing up for our production of Romeo and Juliet, which was about the mothers taking hands over the dead bodies of their children, actually. And people saw that play in an entirely new light. But it took us 4 years to get the audience back. And if I were to do it again, what I realized was it took me and my staff going out, and it was like grassroots organizing. It's meeting with your community and telling them that they will be safe and how it will help them recover, and not be afraid to go out, to break their isolation. People were not wanting to leave their houses and go into places where there were a lot of people because they were afraid a bomb would go off. And that's the closest I've come. And it took time, but it took a lot of personal one-on-one and small group connections. We may have to do that again.
I will just chime in quickly with, I was directing Little Women at the Cabrillo Festival, and during our performance, somebody collapsed, and then somebody else collapsed, And then everyone thought it was a gas attack. It was the summer of 2012. And everybody thought that there was some sort of gas attack. Well, no, it was just extremely old audience members, both of whom were fine. And Marin Alsop, God bless her, was looking at the singers on stage who were freaking out. And she was like, look at me, look at me. And they did. And the performance continued. And the EMT people came in and took folks out. But everyone was convinced that it was a gas leak or, you know, a gas bomb or something. Horrifying.
I have another thing just to add to that, which is a young director named Sammy Canold, Cannold. She was my associate actually on my last show in New York. She's phenomenal, and she was working in Seoul, Korea, and she's written an article why their theaters are open and what protocols they put into place. And now some theater owners are looking at that in New York, her article, and also in London. But I think if anyone can find that, it was published. And there are ways to do it right and safely.
I know a couple of people who were in the company of Phantom in Seoul, and it's pretty amazing what they're doing. And you know, if anybody gets sick, they shut down for 2 weeks. But they have these people there who have been there for months, potting and living in a hotel and doing their jobs.
Yep.
You know, art will find a way.
Mm-hmm.
Art, and that is a wonderful way to end this segment of questions, because art will find a way. And I look at all of you and I think about all of the other artists that we relate to and work with, and everybody continues to bring themselves and their art and their souls to this work, and it will find its way. So that's great. And that leads us to the fact that we have an audience, and the audience cares about the arts, and we would like to give them some ideas for your calls to action for what you think that that people ought to do, or we should do as a society in order to move forward and get ourselves back on track when we can. Peter, might I ask you to start with your calls to action?
Sure. Well, my call to action is to consider supporting your local smaller opera companies of quality that are producing interesting new work. Where I am, Long Beach Opera just did a couple of years ago, did the world premiere of the Central Park Five by Anthony Davis, and did the world premiere of a work called Fallujah. And you can figure out what both of those pieces are about and how important they are, and has been involved in a lot of work. And that is the kind of place which is really thinking outside the box. Urban Arias in DC is another one. American Opera Projects is one which is for 25 years has been producing new works. And these are places which are the way new creativity is engendered and can flourish. I think it's great if you want to support the Met. They are putting out pretty much the same thing they always put out. It's not changing very much, and it's great, but it is what it is. And in a weird way, they kind of don't need us. These other places do. I mean, I hate to say it that bluntly, but you know, that's why I would support the McCarter over some other places, because if they need you, they need you.
Okay.
Yes, West Edge Opera, thank you very much. I had mentioned them too.
Charlene, your calls to action.
Yes, I'm going to repeat the same thing in a way.
All are.
Yeah, I urge you, wherever you live, to financially support your local arts organizations. Here in Greensboro, there are many, but three come to mind. Actually, I have four. One was Arts Greensboro, and then the scholarship program that the Music Academy of North Carolina sponsors, and then the Eastern Music Festival, which is also wonderful, and of course, Greensboro Opera, which is a small opera company that's trying to do the right thing. And I wanted to add one more, the Community Theater of Greensboro, which I will type in their their thing. And then the final thing I want to say is I urge opera boards. This is, I mean, I don't know that anyone here is on an opera board, but we've talked about this a lot at Greensboro Opera, and that is that we must have people who are diverse on our opera boards, because that's how things will change. We have to have representation, and not token representation, but substantive representation on the opera boards, so that we can build audiences that look like all of us. Yeah.
Great. Jerome.
Well, in addition to, seconding what, what's been said about supporting your local arts, your local art organizations, your local art venues, and particularly the smaller ones, because, the precarity that, preceded the pandemic and, through this period hits them harder. I also want to second Emily's mention of the Actors Fund, which has been for a long time doing, being so supportive of performers, not only actors. By far, it's as one example, they actually administered the relief fund that my union, Local 802 of American Federation of Musicians, put out there. That was actually administered by the Actors Fund, and so and they do this sort of thing for for other organizations in our sector. So props to them. Please support them. And coming from a little bit of a side angle, please, I encourage people to just inform themselves about what is going on in the art world. And there are a lot of outlets for of information. One that I particularly like their take on things is an online journal called Arts Journal, which covers music and dance and theater. They forward articles from around the country and around the world, and they've got a great set of bloggers in all the arts, is across genres, and it's just a good place to get a bunch of information about everything from classical music to jazz, to small theaters to large, to et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
And finally, Emily.
What I did want to just emphasize was this idea of an Arts New Deal, and also to talk to representatives that you have, local, state, and federal, that we need a secretary of the Department of the Arts. We need a Department of the Arts. We need to really be supported as the important economic sector that we are, but also we need to be supported, the arts workers, because what we have to give to the country is so crucial, especially at this moment in time. I had a wonderful dear friend, a playwright who died way too young, who said, if you want to go to the headlines, turn on the news, but if you want to hear the truth, go to the theater. And I hold that close to my heart, because I think it's true. And since we are in a post-truth society right now, and we're seeing the horrors of us not knowing our history and who we are as a nation, this is a time when what we have to give as artists is so crucial to our recovery, and to affect change that will save us, quite frankly, because we are facing, I think, an existential moment. So
Thank you so much.
I agree.
I think that speaks for all of us. And one person wrote a question which we didn't get, and I can't pose it now, but he used the quote, "Don't die with the music still in you." And I think that's another extraordinary way of expressing how important the arts are for our souls and for our world. So I want to thank all of you, Charlene, Emily, Jerome, and Peter, for this conversation and for helping us think about the arts in our lives and in our future and how we might move forward. I hope that our audience will think about these things and take some action. And Class Act agrees with all of your calls to action, and so that our call to action is choose one of the things that they suggested and please go ahead and do something that is meaningful to you, whether it's within your local community or thinking about something greater by supporting an Arts New Deal. My thanks go to the production and program teams for this evening: Therese Steiner, Andrea Kirsch, Sarah Ulrich, Sarah Greenberg, Rick Brotman, Katie Marinello, and Diana Labanchu. And again, I thank our panelists for a remarkable conversation, and I thank you all for joining us. And please continue to support the arts. Good evening.